evening and welcome to ILTV Israel Weekly. I am Steve Leibowitz and I'm joined by two former members of Knesset, Dani Ayalon, who served Yisrael Beitenu and who's not yet ready to rejoin politics at this moment.
Not at this moment.
And also Rabbi Dov Lipman from Yesh Atid, who is in politics certainly, and straight from this Ulpan from the studio, will be going to the airport for a 14-day trip to Hong Kong, New Zealand, and Australia.
Making the case for Israel.
Okay. We'll deal with two topics this evening. Later on, we'll look at the two-year budget and the ramifications it will have for the Israeli economy and society. But first, we'll discuss a rather curious comment from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who claims that, well, you know what, rather than have me tell you, let's have Bibi tell you in his own words.
I'm going to say something now that some of you will not believe. But I'm going to say it anyway, because it's true. I, the Prime Minister of Israel, care more about Palestinians than their own leaders do. Israel cares more about Palestinians than their own leaders do. That sounds incredible, right? But consider the following. A few days ago, the world learned that Hamas, the terrorist organization that rules Gaza, stole millions of dollars from humanitarian organizations like World Vision and the United Nations. Innocent and impoverished Palestinians were denied vital aid supplied from nations around the world. Hamas used the stolen money to build a war machine to murder Jews. I want you to think about that. Let that sink in. Hamas stole critical support for Palestinian children so that they could kill our children. So I ask you, who cares more about Palestinians? Israel, that facilitates the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza every single day? Or Hamas, that robs Palestinian children of that very same aid? Israel, that treats wounded Palestinians from Gaza in its hospitals? Or Hamas, that prevents injured Palestinians from getting help? Imagine, just imagine, where we might all be if Palestinian leaders cared as much about helping their own people as they did about hurting our people. The Palestinian people deserve better. And today I express my deepest sympathy with innocent Palestinians and those well-meaning nations who generously donated money to help them. The cynicism and cruelty of Hamas is hurting all of us. It's hurting peace.
Dani Ayalon, does Bibi Netanyahu care more about the Palestinians than their own leaders?
Well, he certainly makes a strong case, and I believe what he leveraged is the new information that was found out about the aid, the international aid that was stolen by Hamas in Gaza. I think also what has made this strong impression was that I think 2 weeks ago, on tape, they caught a Palestinian father who is urging his kid, I think 5, 6 years old kid, to throw rocks at soldiers, risking his own life. And the poor kid didn't want to do it. He didn't know what he wanted from him. So there is a case of what Bibi Netanyahu says. By the way, he's not the first Israeli leader who says it. Golda Meir, our prime minister, already in 1970, she said that when will be peace? Only when the Palestinians will love their children more or less than they hate us.
Dov Lipman, do we have any real compassion in the Israeli government, in the Israeli society, for our Palestinian neighbors?
I can say, and I speak about this all the time, while we were going through Operation Protective Edge, I was a member of Knesset. There is no doubt that every single time we heard about innocent people being killed, it was something which bothered us. We didn't want to see that happening. And Israel goes to such great lengths to go out of its way, even endangers our own soldiers, and it's controversial, in order not to hurt civilians. During that war, I was bombarded with emails by Israelis. Why aren't you just going through and bombing them? Why are you even worrying about them? And the answer is because we do. We do care about them. And we're doing this while Hamas is putting their missiles where their civilians are located. They're targeting our civilians while using their civilians as human shields. We're going out of our way not to hurt their civilians while endangering our civilians in the process. I think this is a very important line of argument which Israel has to make. I would say even more consistently. Point it out time after time from every single level of government to all the organizations, because it's very, very clear that Israel does care about the Palestinians as innocent civilians, and the Palestinian leadership, especially Hamas, but it can be argued even to the Palestinian Authority, really does not. And they're looking about how can they have control, how can they have power, and not really caring for their people.
But a statement like this, in the English language, is it aimed at the Palestinians at all? I mean, are they going to hear this and suddenly say, Bibi really cares about us and has compassion for us? Or is this meant as just a propaganda or Hasbara tactic?
It's only for Hasbara tactics. If he wanted to address the Palestinians, he knows how to do it, either by direct conduits with Abu Mazen or in Arabic or even Hebrew to the Palestinians. By the way, many, many Palestinians, even in Judea and Samaria or even in Gaza, they speak the language, they speak Hebrew. So obviously he's doing it for Israel's Hasbara needs. And the fact that the Prime Minister is going out and making the case shows, first of all, how much he is interested in Hasbara, also how much our position internationally is compromised. So we need the big guns like Netanyahu, and also that he feels on a very firm ground accusing the Palestinians, because the Prime Minister cannot allow himself to be wrong on the facts. And here, he is very right on the facts.
And really, even though he was talking about Gaza, to some extent, he was really targeting Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority leadership.
Absolutely.
But there's a test coming up. They have municipal elections. First time in 11 years that the Palestinians are going to the polls. It's municipal elections. It's not elections for their parliament or for their president. Does Israel have a horse in the race between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority? Or is it like choosing between Clinton and Trump?
Well, I would say the only horse we have is to really ask adherence to former agreements, Oslo agreements, for instance. According to all the Oslo agreements and the interim agreements in 1995, Hamas would be barred from participating in elections because there is a specific clause saying that any organization which opposes peace, which supports terrorism, cannot run for
also
elections.
Municipal elections?
Oh, absolutely.
Any kind of election?
Any kind of elections. Unfortunately, it was Bush, President Bush,
the first,
and the second, George W., and Condoleezza Rice in 2005, 2006 that were adamant about letting Hamas participate with the hope that his true force or his true strength will be shown or diminished. It wasn't the case, and I believe we here also, if we want to see any kind of reconciliations, any kind of hope for any coexistence and dialogue, I think Hamas should be barred unless Hamas changes its stripes, just like the PLO did in 1993, that is renouncing terror and recognizing Israel.
I think the PA was actually surprised that Hamas decided to join the elections. They thought that they would boycott. But is there a danger to Israel if Hamas wins, for example, the municipality of Bethlehem?
Well, I was about to say, Israel doesn't view, I don't think, if maybe publicly we talk differently, but internally, I don't think we view elections as a positive thing. I think we very often prefer the status quo because there's no moderate movement within the Palestinian areas that could rise to power. When we have elections, it's only a possibility of the current situation or more extreme taking over.
There is no reform political movement within the Palestinian population?
I meet with numerous individuals and people who wish they could have a voice, but anybody who even dares speaking out, it's immediately squelched by the extremist forces. I think that's the biggest problem that we have. Does anybody hear moderate voices coming from the Palestinian side that are really sincerely reaching out towards Israel? We don't. I think that's the biggest problem that we have. So elections, very often we with the Western mind view that as an opportunity for some kind of a new movement and a new spirit. In our situation in the Middle East, these kinds of elections are either the status quo or we shift towards the extreme and radical, and that's not a good thing for Israel.
If we're already talking about elections, let's look at the U.S. just for a moment. I think it's becoming clear that a Clinton White House is what we're aiming at after November, well, after January of 2017. Do you think that here in Jerusalem, in the Prime Minister's office, they're already gearing up for what a Clinton administration will look like?
Well, I think they have been burnt, and Prime Minister Netanyahu was burnt, I would say personally, after the last elections where it was seen that he preferred Romney at the time. So right now he's keeping an arm's length. He's not making any comments. He's not meeting any of the candidates, or if they send any of their envoys, he is very much showing that he's meeting both sides. But certainly a Clinton administration is something that is very familiar. There is a long-standing relations between Bibi Netanyahu
And not all
and
negative.
Hillary.
Familiar,
Not all negative. I mean, you can term, it's a love-hate relations, but certainly there is some common grounds. There is mutual respect, even if they do not agree. And at the end of the day, I know Hillary Clinton personally. When I was in Washington, she was a senator from New York. Then when I was in the foreign ministry, she was a secretary of state. She really has our back. And we may not agree with her on issues like settlements, Iran, but at the end of the day, she will not compromise Israel's security.
And do you think that a Clinton administration will take the risk of once again jumping into Middle East politics? Maybe Bill Clinton could be a good envoy instead of who they had before.
So in your introduction, you referenced the fact that I'm still in the political sphere and looking to get back in, so I'm going to take a pass on commenting on that. The one thing I will say, just slightly off topic but on topic, this new Trump campaign in Israel, which has been announced recently, people are asking me, do I think that will have an impact? I don't. I think that people in Israel are very well informed. They've either decided Clinton, Trump, or neither, and I don't think it will have any kind of impact whatsoever on the Israeli voters in the United States elections.
All right, let's turn our discussion to the budget. By all accounts, the two-year budget plan, which has recently been passed in the cabinet, has passed the spending limits and reached 359 billion shekels. You know how much that is in dollars? I did the math. $95 billion for 2017, which is an increase of more than 5%. The 2018 budget is set at 376 billion shekel. We don't quite reach 100 billion, but we're at $99 billion. The Bank of Israel is critical, saying it paves the way for growing debt. Before we begin our discussion on the budget, let's hear directly from the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister.
תקציב עם מנועי צמיחה, עם הורדת מיסים, עם הקלה על חברות, עם הקלה משמעותית ברגולציה, משמעותית בפתיחת עסקים, בגישה בכלל לכל ה-doing business מה שנקרא. לגבי תקציב הביטחון, אני ממש גאה שבעקבות הסכם רב שנתי שחתמנו גם ראש הממשלה, גם שר הביטחון וגם משרד האוצר, אנחנו הפסקנו את השיח האלים נגד חיילי צה"ל, נגד הצבא ונגד מערכת הביטחון. וכשהרמטכ"ל אומר שהתקציב הנוכחי מאפשר לו למלא את תפקידו בצורה המיטבית, זה פשוט עושה לנו טוב. כפי שעשינו בתקציב הקודם, גם בתקציב הזה אנחנו ממשיכים בהורדת מיסים. לתפיסתי, הורדת מיסים זה מחולל צמיחה, זה מנוע צמיחה, כמובן בנוסף להשקעות ומנועי צמיחה נוספים. בתקציב הזה נעשים צעדים משמעותיים להילחם בריכוזיות ולפתוח את השוק לתחרות. אנחנו ממשיכים במאמץ הלאומי לפתרון משבר הדיור. גם בשנים הקרובות רוב קרקעות המדינה יוקצו לזוגות הצעירים.
התקציב נושא בשורות של עידוד הצמיחה, הגדלת התחרות, הפחתת יוקר המחיה. אני מבקש לחדד ולהבהיר, הצמיחה היא היסוד החשוב ביותר בניהול מדיניות הכלכלה של מדינת ישראל והמדיניות החברתית של מדינת ישראל. אין מדיניות חברתית ללא מדיניות כלכלית שמאפשרת צמיחה ומייצרת המשאבים. כל השאר זה רק לדבר על חלוקה, כי קטיפת הפירות מהעץ, אנחנו חייבים כל הזמן לגדל את הפירות, לגדל את העץ. ולכן בזכות הצמיחה של העץ הכלכלי שלנו, מגיעים כספי המיסים שמאפשרים למדינה לממן את כל הצרכים שלה, את השירותים החברתיים, בחינוך, ברווחה, בבריאות, בביטחון.
Well, the opposition says the budget is plagued by misplaced priorities and political handouts amounting to capitulation to coalition parties and their interests. Yesh Atid called the budget corrupt and irresponsible. Dov Lipman, corrupt and irresponsible, that's pretty tough language.
It's pretty tough language, but that's what happens when a government plunges a country into deficit. We have to understand, a 376 billion shekel budget is okay if you're bringing in 376 billion shekel. But in this case, where we know in advance that we're plunging ourselves into 20 plus billion shekel deficit. When we came into office in 2013, there was a deficit of 40 billion shekel. By the way, the result of a 2-year budget beforehand. A 2-year budget, you cannot possibly foresee what's going to happen down the road.
You're against 2-year budget.
We're against it, absolutely. And we went right away and we switched it to a 1-year budget. We made a very painful, difficult first budget to cover the deficit. And when we left office and Finance Minister Kachlon thanked us for giving him a surplus, we made the cuts where we had to make cuts, and he was left with a surplus.
Are we the only ones in the world that have a 2-year budget?
So there's one other country, and I'm forgetting the name, but it's not a country that we want to.
I think it's Chile, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think. I mean, it's not a country that we're necessarily looking to mirror. I'll say it that way. So 2-year budget, but also knowing in advance that we're going into deficit. And why are we going into deficit? Because of coalition agreements, just political handouts. That, from our perspective, is corruption. To know in advance that we're passing off the problem, someone else will deal with it. Right now, I'll reap the political benefits. That, in our perspective, is corruption. We think it's not fair to the people of Israel. The people of Israel on the ground are the ones who will have to suffer, and that's why we are very much against this budget, and we don't think it's good for the people of Israel.
Donnie, opposition leader Isaac Herzog says that the new state budget widens gaps, deepens poverty, and harms industry and agriculture. Do you agree with that? Isn't that also exaggeration?
Well, you have to remember, where you stand is where you sit, I guess. So from the opposition, I guess you have to attack the government. I don't think that the principles of the government, of this budget, are much different than the governments before. Truly, there is some money for coalition maintenance.
You are a member of a coalition.
Right.
Is it justified to build into a budget elements which in effect are simply there to satisfy your coalition partners, to pay off the coalition partners for projects that they want?
Well, I wouldn't call it a payoff, but it is a small price to pay to keep our democracy and to keep some stability and governability for the government. And why is it that you have to pay to these different sectors? Because they do not get the money without really pushing and without having representation in the Knesset.
What does it amount to? Is it minuscule in terms of the overall budget, or is it major?
It is minuscule. You see, Israel's budget has grown, but Israel's economy has also grown. Today, we are a $35,000 per capita economy, about one of the most successful economies in the world, certainly in the first 20 countries in the world. So certainly we can afford all this coalition money. But I am not sure that that this budget will show or will prove it to encourage growth, because deficit does not encourage growth. And this is what I am disappointed about, is the growing deficit. Because what is a growing deficit? That means that our children will have to pay for the debt we're taking and incurring now, on the one hand. And secondly, with a deficit, it's going to be harder for business to borrow money. That means crippling growth.
I would differ from my good friend Donnie in terms of that's the price that you have to pay. We formed a government. I remember people would come to me asking me for money for projects as a member of Knesset. And I'd say, I don't have money as a member of Knesset.
Even if it's a good
and
project?
And they said, what do you mean you don't have money as a member of Knesset? Don't you have coalition money that each member of Knesset gets? We didn't have it. We formed a government where we at least were not party to that. And to know that we're going into deficit for those payoffs, that's something which is very difficult. And remember, in order to pay for this, we're also cutting a few percentage points from the budget of each ministry. That's welfare, that's health, that's education, and it's all for the sake. I think it can be done differently. I agree with Donnie, that's the game. I wish it wouldn't be the game. I wish we could change the rules of the game and say we're above that and beyond that.
For this, we need to change our government system. If we had an American system, with where the winner takes all, where all the cabinet ministries or the secretaries work for the prime minister in sync and in harmony, this could be the case. But unfortunately, we don't have this case here. And in order to form a government and you have to form a government, you must have this allocation for the different sectors that are represented in the government.
I noticed that one of the ministers that did not complain about the current budget is the Minister of Defense. Now, normally at this time we have the Chief of Staff and the Minister of Defense clamoring because there are cuts in the defense budget. Now, our enemies are in disarray. We're certainly not in a situation where the defense budget has to be, or are we? Let me ask it as a question. Are we in a situation where we cannot afford to cut the defense budget to some extent in order to help social programs, in order to help health, in order to build new hospitals and create more beds and some of the things that the society desperately needs? Do we need as much spending in military areas as we're doing?
Well, we do need the spending. Certainly the threats are still there. Of course, we do have a strategic window, I believe, of a few years because there is no conceivable coalition that can really attack us. But we still have Iran, we still have cyber, we still have security that we need to take care of, and mostly missile defense. If Hezbollah has 100,000 missiles, which are much more dangerous than the ones that Hamas had, more accurate, getting a larger payload, certainly we do need the money. However, I would give it to the credit of the former Defense Minister Ya'alon. He and Mr. Kahlon did work together with the Chief of Staff on a multi-year budget. So they don't have to have this ritual of bickering and fighting every time.
Final word, Dov?
Israel's in a real tough place. 1/6 of our budget going to defense. There's no country in the world which has that, and therefore the other areas do suffer. The big controversy is less how much it should be and more where it should go to. There's a lot of discussion about fine-tuning the army to the 21st century, dealing with the challenges that Donnie mentioned, and not the old-school army that we've been used to. Certain personnel issues as well. That's where a lot of the controversy is. But in terms of the amount, I think we live with the fact that defense budget is as high as it is, and we try to find a way to make do with the rest of the money for all the social needs of the country, and that's part of the struggle that we have in Israel, and also part of the miracle of the survival of the state of Israel, that despite the threats that we have on all sides and the high defense budget, look how our country is flourishing, look how great we're doing, and we thank God that we're able to survive with our external enemies and fight with each other about some of these internal issues. That's a blessing.
All this time talking about the budget, I hope it wasn't too boring for our viewers, but it's important issues, it's important things to deal with. Well, our time just zipped by, didn't it? I'd like to once again thank our panel that included former Knesset member Donnie Ayalon. You've not changed your mind about joining politics. You don't want to give us a scoop right now?
I'll work on it. I'll work on it.
All right. And Dov Lipman, have you missed your plane yet?
Haven't missed my plane yet.
Okay. Well, I'm Steve Leibowitz. Thanks for joining us. Until next Tuesday, same time, same station. It's Israel Weekly on ILTV.